Welcome. Today we're going to talk about how to develop PowerPoints for platform presentations. The discussion that follows is based on the concepts of technical communications that we've used at Cardno-Entrix. Our point of view has been honed by cognitive and historical research, our training, and our past experience. There are many ways to develop presentations, equally valid, and the suggestions in here are not meant to suggest CTAC requirements. If there's a takeaway to the presentation we're about to give you, it is that simple always works better than complicated. We've looked at research on cognition and at some historical PowerPoints, which we will share with you. And as we go through our discussion, you'll see that we are basically saying less is more. We're going to talk about story, structure, content, and design, and you'll see a pattern. Fewer ideas, fewer bullets, fewer words, shorter words, simpler design, simpler animations, less data. Use parallel constructions to simplify patterns. These will all help you hone in on your messages and create a memorable presentation. PowerPoint is best thought of as a delivery system for keywords and images. If you're the presenter, it should be your tool, not your crutch. It should be engaging your audiences. You'll see that bullet number 4 is the same on each list. And that's the trick. The Joint Forces commander in Afghanistan in 2010 said, "PowerPoint makes us stupid." Our goal here is to create those other PowerPoints, the ones that make us smart and engage our audiences. Defining the story that you want to tell and the audience you're trying to reach will help you make the choices you need to make. Why are you planning to stand in front of a crowd to share your work? What is exciting about it? What captured the attention of CTAC's judges? Your story questions current thinking, advances science, refines a concept, improves a method. This presentation is not a dialogue between you and the 1 or 2 people you know in the audience. Not about impressing with how firm your grasp is of the subject matter. This is a discussion between peers. And your job is to make sure that the audience follows and understands your talk. Remember, not everyone is an expert on your topic, and some may be completely unfamiliar with it. You need to write and present with smart scientists, but not necessarily specialists in mind. There's a tendency with presentations to start by taking a paper and dumping the key points onto slides. But the audience for a presentation can't process information the same way that a reader can. They can't go back to a table or map or stop to look up a citation. So you need to find a story to tell. Give less weight to elements that are not tied directly to your story. Elements should be required for comprehension, relevant to your discussion and conclusion, and not obvious or assumed, not background science. The qualifier at the bottom is important, though. We are not saying that you should discard data or analysis that confounds or contradicts your conclusions, but you do not need to detail everything. If the subject of your talk is methods, and demonstrating that your methods provide similar results to experiments done with other methods, then focus on that, not on the implications of the results. Similarly, if you used standard methodology and got provocative results, reference your methodology, but focus your talk on your results. For most papers, this is a pretty obvious organization. But your organization might look more like this, or this. But even with this natural structure, remember to tell a story that's engaging. And this is advice you've probably heard before, make sure that you start by telling your audience what it is you're going to tell them, then set out to do so, and finish up by reminding them of the story you just told. Summarize, tell, remind. This is both your overall structure and can be the structure for your individual sections as well. The more guideposts you provide, the more you help to keep your audiences with you. The relevant point from this research by Mayer and Marino. I'm not going to read what they wrote because you can process it better if you read it yourself. We're going to talk about parallel structure a few times because it's a very important cognitive tool. You can think about it as songwriting if you'd like. We anticipate when the verses start and end and when the chorus kicks in. And knowing what to anticipate keeps us in the rhythm. So, for instance, if you have 5 sections to your talk, use the same sort of approach to explain them. Have consistent headers, consistent slide structure, and stick with your key points. Don't let your slides go out on tangents. Consistency helps your viewers understand where they are in the presentation. This is especially helpful to audience members who might be struggling to take notes on your presentation. If you want to just show the results on a slide and talk through them, you'll probably have just as much, if not more, attention from your audience. You need one slide. If you go this route, just make sure that you have great notes in front of you to keep yourself on target and to make sure that you pace yourself properly. Of course, you could also use 50 slides, a completely random number. If you go really fast and just put individual images or nesting layers on a bunch of slides, you can go through a whole lot of slides quickly. There are no prizes for squeezing words onto a slide. It sounds like a presentation with 10 slides takes less time to present than a presentation with 20 slides, but that isn't true. At the same time, you want to be careful not to break up a list across pages. Section 2. Bullets are a form of outlining. And think back to the rules of outlining that you learned early on and apply them here. We're going to spend some time talking about bullets, mainly because there isn't a lot of guidance out there on crafting better bullets. Many experts say just to eliminate bullets, but that isn't always practical advice, especially for science platforms. Not only are they useful to you, the writer, but they should help your audience to take notes on your presentation and to be able to understand what you think is important. You'll see in the exercise that follows that your audience has an expectation that how you sort out the information is relevant to what they need to know, and fewer bullets are more impactful. This is a famous and tragic slide. It was part of a presentation that Boeing made to NASA after the Columbia shuttle went into orbit in January 2003. A small piece of foam had penetrated the thermal protection system on the leading edge of the left wing at takeoff. When the shuttle was in orbit, engineers pondered the implications of the breach. They met, they shared PowerPoints, and in the end they took no action. On February 1st, the shuttle disintegrated during re-entry, killing all 7 astronauts on board. The Accident Review Board examined the PowerPoint deck that included this slide. In fact, Volume 1 of the accident report specifically calls out this presentation, and I quote, "The choice of headings, arrangements of information, and size of bullets on the key chart serve to highlight what management already believed." After the accident, Edward Tufte, the Yale Emeritus Professor and guru of visual communication, was asked to evaluate some of the communications, and his report was quite withering. I'm going to take you through this slide looking at a few different aspects of how it didn't work as a communications tool. I'm not going to go over the same material as Tufte does, so if you're interested in learning more, you should also go to the report of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, Volume 1, pages 191 and 201, or look at Tufte's full analysis, on his website, edwardtufte.com. Try to speed your way through this while I talk. You'll immediately see that it's not easy to do. The risk of throwing up slides like this and then talking over them is that your audience doesn't understand. First, note that it's really two slides. The first slide is all about the good news. Our model conservatively suggests an overprediction of penetration. But now to the bad news at the bottom. The actual flight is outside the test database, and there could be significant injury. I'm going to help you with some boxes here and some essential paraphrasing. Spray-on foam insulation can penetrate the hard tile coating of the thermal protection system. And if it does, it could do a lot of damage. And by the way, the impact is 640 times what we tested for in our model. So we really don't know what this means for the astronauts currently orbiting space in this shuttle. Now, turning away from the slide for just a minute, we're going to go through three basic rules of outlining using the bullets on this slide. Conventional wisdom is that you should use no more than 6 bullets per slide. My personal preference is to use more slides and less bullets. A couple exceptions: if you're listing steps, it's helpful to see from the first step through to the last. And if you want to show a universe of information, it's helpful not to break it up. For instance, it could be helpful to see your conclusions all in one place. Or conversely, you could put each conclusion on its own slide and flip through them quickly. Our style in this presentation is to give you more slides with less detail, hoping that you will take 1 or 2 pieces of information from each slide. We feel, and cognitive research backs us up, that you have better odds of remembering more if the slides are less dense. There are 10 bullets on this slide, but some are less urgent, and as we discussed, they tell 2 stories. Here are the essential bullets on this slide. There are 4 of them. And now, sequencing is how you choose to prioritize information. Usually your sequence should start with the most important fact, because that's the bullet that will get the most attention. Other ways you might want to sequence could be from small to large, or east to west, or you could sequence chronologically, such as a list of steps. If you're creating a chronological sequence, number your bullets to clue the reader in that the ordering of the points you're making is a factual detail and not random. But align your sequence with your messages. Returning to the 4 highlighted bullets, it seems obvious that the message here was swallowed up by a sequence that went from good news to bad news instead of acknowledging urgency at the top. And I think for the purposes for which the slide was used, this is the appropriate sequence. Spray-on foam insulation can penetrate the hard tile coating. If it does, it could do a lot of damage. How much, we don't know. The impact is 640 times what we tested for in our model. Hierarchies are your levels of bullets. Be rigorous in your use of hierarchies. They waste space. Each additional hierarchy reduces the space for all of the other information on the slide. It forces an indent and it reduces the font size. Important points need to be written in your first hierarchy. Points in your second hierarchy should be directly related to the point of the bullet in the first hierarchy, and so on. If you're using more than 2 hierarchies, you're getting into the weeds with details that could be addressed in your talk, but do not need to be thrown on the screen. And this is a pet peeve of mine, if you only have 1 bullet in your first hierarchy, this is your topic, and it shouldn't have a bullet. In fact, it could probably be your header. You'll see that there are 4 levels of hierarchy here, including a first hierarchy that's only used once. And here you'll see how all of these hierarchies have buried the important information. Look how deeply hidden our 4 points are. The most important fact here is in the third hierarchy. beyond the structure of the bullets, let's look at the actual words on the slides. Here are a few tips that we can go through as we examine each of the bullets again. All of these tips will simplify your slides. Be direct, not formal. Use plain English. Although precision is scientific, those big abstract words actually get in the way of comprehension. Full sentences slow comprehension. Articles like the, these can usually be assumed when you're reading bullets. Here are 4 pivotal bullets as written in the original slide, with the hierarchies removed. Ignoring the header for now, let's put the technical words in plain English. The audience shouldn't have to be working at translation. It might be that the engineers who wrote this were comfortable with SOFI, but their audience may be less so. Cut out your redundancies. You'll see that the 2 phrases circled here are completely useless. What are you really trying to say? Be direct and think about whether you really need to. Correct language is more memorable. Here's another quote from the accident report. The uncertainties in the center condensed the debris assessment team's formal presentation to an informal verbal brief at the mission management team meeting. In other words, they couldn't remember and articulate the significant points. And here we shorten up the sentences and put back the nouns to create direct points. And now, once we've cut through the noise, let's think about what we are trying to say here. It's really only 2 points, 2 terrifying facts, and 1 underlying piece of data. Now let's look at that header. As we said earlier, headers should really be topic sentences. And a solid point can be made with no header at all, just 1 or 2 points on a slide, as we do on a lot of slides in this presentation. Don't add a header just because you think you need one for a slide to be complete. Use a header to frame the text within your bigger story or to provide context. Back to the Boeing slide and its contradictory title. The title suggests conservatism when in fact, if all you remember is the header, you've missed the point. This gets your attention and defines the issue. It's memorable. And let's put it together. We've hit on the stark facts. I imagine, although this is personal speculation, that the engineers in the room would have been able to do a better job articulating the message as conveyed here as they reported it to their superiors. All those other details on the original slide were kind of besides the point in telling this story, these points. I'm going to go back to parallel structure. It's much easier to understand words when they fall into an obvious pattern. I'm going to go back over a couple slides here to make that point. This slide constructs bullets using parallel noun phrases. Foam debris could, model cannot, volume of foam debris 640 times larger. These bullets, which you've seen before, are imperative sentences, meaning the subject is the unwritten you, and the bullets all start with the verb. Probably not as useful in a CTAC presentation, however useful in a lot of other types of presentations, such as trainings. And here we're using gerund phrases, which are just phrases using ing words. This is a useful shorthand when all of the bullets can be categorized using one action. Here, the relatively weak action is keep in mind. Observe syllables. Short words are easy to read quickly and take less space. Short words are just as professional as long words. Use. Start. Then. Wrong. Also. And try not to use a phrase when a word will do, such as these. Know your audience. Remember that at CTAC, you'll be presenting to your peers who live in the same world that you do. You don't need to define units of measure or really common agencies like EPA, but you do need to define terms that could be known to a subset of your audience, but not to everyone.
Designing your presentation. Design can be as simple as a light-colored text on a dark background. A black background can look harsh when presented on a computer screen, but can be a useful sleight of hand if you are presenting on a projector, such as at CTAC. The black background disappears and you are left with borders within borders when you present images or figures. Also, a darker background is easier on the eyes in a dark room. If you would like more structure and are not comfortable designing your own presentation, there are plenty of templates available that can help unify your presentation. Microsoft offers a variety of free ones on their website and built into PowerPoint. A graphic designer can even help you prepare a custom one that is unique to your topic. But choose a template wisely. Choose something relevant and easy to read, something not too flashy or tacky, take up too much of your header and footer space. In many templates, the header and the footer leave you with little actual space to work with. They eat up space by cramming your information into one small piece of the frame. Choose a design that gives you maximum space to work with. Using fonts. Sans serif fonts are fonts without the horizontal elements at the bottoms of the letters. They form more distinct words and are better for PowerPoints. While serif fonts have extra stuff at the tips, serif fonts are generally used for large swatches of body text in posters or papers, not presentations. Stick to simple fonts. Serif fonts are easy to read in small type and look formal on paper. Sans serif fonts like Arial are generally bolder and look better on the screen. This is a standard complaint at CTAC. Presentations that cannot be read from the back or even the middle of the room. Use the largest font possible if you can, designed for the people in the back of the room. 18-point font is about the limit to what can be seen, and even this causes eye strain. There is just no point in filling a slide with anything smaller. Only you will know it's there. Another common mistake is not spacing text effectively. Here is a list of things you might present that runs all together as is. Make it easier to digest by grouping like things and emphasizing key points. Physical closeness implies relationship. Emphasis calls attention to important points. Don't be afraid to make certain text big and bold. Rather than having your bullets run on into a mass of text, it helps to group things and use emphasis to pull out key points. Again, emphasize key points to call attention to them, and group topics together to make your slide easier to read. This difference makes your slide much easier to digest. Using graphics. When including an image in your presentation, don't be afraid to use the whole space. Break out of the template. Sometimes an image can tell a story better and be much more interesting for your audience to look at than a list of text. When using images, always make sure they're high resolution and not blurry. And do not pull down images from the internet. Most images online have some sort of copyright protection, even though they might not say it. Try to use your own photos or attribute the photographer who did take them. Using an image in the background of your slides can make text hard to read. There are a number of ways to manipulate your image so that you provide enough contrast between background and text. Animation. Sometimes animation can help tell your story in a more captivating way. One good example of a place to use animation is when you're presenting sequential events. When discussing something that takes place over time, why present something as bullets when you can make it more dynamic? An animated timeline is a great way to talk through events. You can use each animation as a talking point and not be tempted to read off of a list. Another example of where animation can come in handy is this bulleted list explaining the concept known as production foregone, which calculates lost fish populations over time as a result of an incident. It is complicated and hard to follow. An animated sequence describes the same thing as above, but is engaging, and you will not be tempted to read through it. Simple animations like this can be created in PowerPoint by layering images. Sometimes you need to understand spatial relationships, which an animation can make very clear. You can zoom in or out on an important location to help give your study greater context. Here, let us see how statistically similar sampling points are actually dissimilar. But be careful when you use animation. Not only should you refrain from goofy and distracting animations, they also add another layer of performance requirements and performance anxiety. Rehearse your animations and take care to understand and note if they are automatic or on click. It is useful to click on the animation pane, which lays it out slide by slide. Assistance on how to use PowerPoint's animation functions can be found on Microsoft's website. Graphs and charts. Sometimes graphics don't really say anything at all and only serve to confuse. This is another fairly famous slide. It is from the New York Times, but there are 900,000 references to it on Google. General Stanley A. McChrystal, the leader of American and NATO forces in Afghanistan, was shown this PowerPoint slide in Kabul in 2009. It was meant to portray the complexity of the American military strategy. General McChrystal responded, "When we understand that slide, we'll have won the war." Don't let your graphics confuse people. They should aid in understanding. Here's an example of a clear and simple graphic. It tells the general story, not all of the details. You can talk through the details. Make sure fonts are legible in your figures. An illegible graph becomes readable by reducing the amount of text on the x-axis. What's the point of displaying something that no one can read? Keep this in mind when creating in Excel or elsewhere. You can easily import graphs from Excel into PowerPoint by copying and pasting. Just make sure to edit the design elements once in PowerPoint to be more legible for a presentation. Make fonts and line sizes large enough to be visible to the people in the back of the room. When adding images to your presentation, beware of cliché, using word art, Comic Sans font, clip art, silly animations, and neon colors. These can all detract from the professionalism of your presentation. Tables. Remember that you are telling a story here, and columns of numbers do not tell a story. You need to guide the audience to understand what these tables are saying. Also remember that anything less than 16-point type cannot be read from across the room. Your audience will see this as fuzz, not as anything helpful. Instead of cramming the screen full of a table with fonts that might not even be legible, one technique is to animate and blow up significant rows or cells, like this. Use animation to help hone in on the actual story.
Preparing. Colors, transparencies, and framing frequently change when you're projecting instead of viewing on a monitor, and your presentation will certainly look different projected on a large screen in a dark room. Even the transition from one projector to another projector could change the look. So be wary if you're being overly precise in your use of color or frames. And you'll probably know to follow these 2-second bullets. Participating in your session should be a pleasurable event for you and for your audience. Engage your audience. Have fun. Breathe. Take your moment to shine. And I'm not going to read this one. Bullet 1 goes for implied as well as explicit asks. This isn't a sales pitch. And for Bullet 2, remember that CTAC is a professional organization that espouses a broad range of points of view. The conference is meant to provoke debate, but not attacks. Be careful to avoid violating copyright. When in doubt, obtain permission to use materials. CTAC will give you 15 minutes to present and 5 minutes for Q&A. Bring a watch or use presentation mode in your PowerPoint, which gives you a timer on your desktop. Especially if you're presenting something controversial, leave time for questions, and certainly prepare yourself to answer the tough questions. And we close the way we opened by reminding you to keep it simple. And as we suggested on slide 12, we're finishing up by reminding you of the story we just told, which is less narrative, less data, less words. It will be simpler to remember, simpler to present, and more memorable. Thank you. We hope you found this helpful. We're going to run through 3 slides of references for you, but this is the end of our presentation. See you at the conference.